Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Dr. Rhonda, and joining me here in the Marietta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new TEAM therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. His latest book, Feeling Great, contains powerful new techniques that make rapid recovery possible for many people struggling with depression and anxiety. Dr. Burns is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine.
Hello, Rhonda.
Hello, David, and welcome everyone to episode 316. We welcome our listeners around the country and across the world. And today we have two guests. All of our guests are special, and these two people are also extremely special. We have Sunny Choi and Audrey Kodye. Audrey, am I saying your last name correctly?
It's Kodye.
Kodye. I apologize. I'm going to introduce them, and then I have a lovely, quick endorsement to read. But first, let me just tell you who they are. Sunny's been on our podcast before, and he is a licensed clinical social worker and a clinical therapist focusing on providing services to underserved populations, such as ethnic minorities, LGBTQ clients, and low-income clients. Using TEAM-CBT, Sunny has collaborated with other clinic members that he's worked with, such as medical physicians and nutritionists, in order to provide holistic and integrated care to his patients. It's an effective strategy that results in quick recovery. Sunny has also collaborated with other community members to educate them and advocate for the delivery of effective and quality services for underserved populations. Sunny's prior roles include mental health worker at the Office of Diversity and Equity with the San Mateo County Health System, and he's been a behavioral health specialist at the Northeast Medical Services, which is a community health clinic for the medically underserved. And Audrey is a registered psychologist, and level 3 certified TEAM-CBT therapist. And I think Sunny you are also level 3 TEAM-CBT therapist. Yeah.
Yeah.
Audrey owns a private practice called Overcome Anxiety Psychological Services, where she provides video therapy services to adults in a few different provinces and territories in Canada. She mainly works with professionals who are struggling with anxiety and/or obsessive-compulsive disorder issues. She is especially passionate about working with professionals from racialized populations, and she provides services in English, French, and Mauritian Creole. Did I say that right, Audrey?
You
Mauritian?
did, yes.
Okay,
yes,
cool.
Mauritius.
Wow. How impressive that you can speak 3 languages. You're trilingual.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So I'm just going to read a really quick endorsement, and then we're going to dive into with our brilliant guests. And, David has on his website free courses for people to take. And one of them is about an anxiety course, and it's broken up into different lessons. And lesson number 24 is for people to listen to podcast 181, which is live therapy with Sarah that we've entitled Shrinks Are Human Too. And a listener, Colette, recently listened to that lesson 24, which was that podcast. And she wrote, "Amazing podcast. I have so much identification with Sarah. As always, I'm learning so much from you, Dr. Burns." It's Colette.
Thank you, Colette. We just really appreciate that.
Yeah, we love it when people dial in, right in. Okay. So Sunny and Audrey, let me ask you to jump off. Can you tell us more about your background and how it relates to your work in the mental health field?
And also, what's our topic for today's podcast?
Oh, our topic today, is Team for Our Diverse Community.
Cool. So relating to the topic, my background is pretty diverse too. I was born and came from a very privileged background in Hong Kong. I was the male, middle class. I was the Han's Chinese. So I was like basically the dominant privilege in Hong Kong. And of course, when I came to the US when I was 12, then it turned into a more underprivileged situation because we were undocumented. And for the first time, I was told that I was not good enough and got beat up because of my color or even my eyes. They were saying somehow my eyes is kind of slanty, which is kind of ridiculous anyway. And then, of course, growing up gay, teenager and Chinese Catholic, there's a lot of hatred, including hatred for myself. I was really taught to idealize white people through movies since I was a kid in Hong Kong and even here. And I just want to be like a straight white male. And I was taught not to look back and work twice as hard as other people. Don't worry if there's discriminations and racism. So I study, I work hard. I went to UCLA for my electrical engineering degree, went to Stanford for my management degree. And initially, I thought I made it. I become more privileged because I make more money, I have more positions, more good connections, socially accepted. But then I actually became more depressed and anxious eventually because I still have this really core belief that I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough being myself. And it took me a long time to heal myself. And then fast forward many years, I did my second career as a therapist. And one of my passions was to help marginalized people, like people I experienced, like I was like that too. So I end up working in many clinics, including a medical clinic that serve the underprivileged population, ranging from the poor people who work full-time but are still homeless in Bay Area, people of color who experience many layers of discriminations, and then, of course, a lot of LGBT folks who were harassed or kicked out of their home because of who they love. Many abusive women who were abused and they were afraid to speak up. And just in general, many hardworking immigrants of color who were told that they're not good enough and they were like stealing jobs from their own country since they're all American now. So yeah, and many of us experience mental health issues resulting from my early trauma, and we did not seek out mental health services because of the mental health stigma and also lack of culturally appropriate services. So I was glad that I was able to help out with that population. Yeah, and even now I'm very passionate about working as a private therapist for that population. Yeah. Audrey? Yeah.
You were talking about the pain that you've experienced and the discrimination and, the lower view of yourself after you were discriminated against in the United States. How has team therapy helped you in your recovery and your healing?
Yeah, definitely did a lot. And we'll probably can cover that later too after the introduction. But yeah, that core belief that I'm not good enough, a lot of avoidance, behavior, being too nice, definitely a lot of teamwork that was done to myself and also with David helped a lot. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Yeah. So Audrey, tell us more about your background and how that relates to your work in the mental health field.
Yeah, so I relate to a lot of what Sunny was saying about having a very diverse background and growing up feeling like I was not good enough and compensating in so many ways, like by working really hard throughout my life to try to disprove those beliefs and messages I got from people around me.
Why wasn't I good enough?
Just so I was born in a country where the ethnic group I belonged to, like being of African descent, was kind of like at the bottom of a hierarchy, still is actually. So there's a lot of discrimination and racism towards that particular group in my country of origin. I think also being a woman and from a low middle class family as I was growing up, that also contributed to that.
What country were you born in?
It's called Mauritius.
Mauritius, yeah. Mm-hmm. There's a fellow in the Tuesday group who was an ambassador from Pakistan to Mauritius.
Oh yeah, I did meet him. Yes.
Yeah, that's so cool.
That's really cool. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's definitely a large part of it as I was growing up, and then I immigrated to France and then Canada, and not having English or French as my first language and having an accent when I speak both, an accent that is not considered to be mainstream, that has also contributed to discrimination and racism, and also being a Muslim revert in Canada for the past 7 years. So I've experienced discrimination and racism in a large number of settings, including education, even my workplaces and places where I was volunteering my time as well. I also wanted to say I identify as a Black woman, and I have a lot of pride when it comes to that because of what it represents to me in terms of culture and heritage, and also resiliency, because my ancestors lived through slavery for a large number of generations and years. And I know I would not be where I am today if it wasn't for how resilient they were throughout all that. At the same time, I'm also aware of where the historical foundations of racial terms like Black and white, like how they've been used to sort of condone slavery as well, because we're used to divide people into two groups, and it's a social construct. It's not a real thing. And so I've been more conflicted about calling myself Black for that reason. But as I said, I also feel very proud of what it means to me to be a Black woman. And so, as I said, there's been all those different things in my identity that have resulted in me being discriminated against. But at the same time, I also know I have privilege in other areas of my life, being a cisgender person, being somebody who has a graduate level education, being a lighter skinned Black woman as well. And when it comes to how all these things relate to my work in the mental health field, I know I developed a range of issues very young and had them for most of my life. And it looked like very severe social anxiety and even depression at times. And I now know that this is largely connected to the racial trauma that I went through. And all of these things have really influenced my desire to work with professionals, especially those who are from racialized populations who have privilege like me in some areas, but don't in some others as well, who like me did not have opportunities to process what was happening to them as they were growing up, and even sometimes now, because when we're kids and we grow up in that environment, we don't have the language to express verbally what's going on. And also, I know I felt obligated for a large number of years to hide what was going on. For me, like Sunny said, like to sort of push through and move forward and not think about it too much, and maintain an image that everything was good and I was successful. And I know a lot of people still experience that. So it's really a passion for me to help them heal as a whole person.
The same question to you, Audrey. How have you found team therapy to be supportive of your healing process?
Yes, absolutely. I actually did a course of therapy with a team certified therapist, which really helped me a lot. And after that, being in team circles, like the Tuesday group, and having opportunities for personal work, this has done so much for me. And just knowing team, and where it's normalized that we as therapists also have our own stuff to deal with, and where it's celebrated even for us to do our personal work, I think that has really helped me to admit that there was something going on for me that I needed to address, and just did wonders in terms of my healing journey.
Nice. How were you introduced to TEAM?
I had a supervisor on one of my workplaces who really loved David's work and talked a lot about it. So I looked into it, and I've been part of the community since then.
Yeah, Audrey and I were talking about how team therapy has helped us and our clients a lot. And we thought that this podcast would be a good opportunity for clinicians or even clients to know the effectiveness, but also it would be even more helpful if they would understand the challenges of these populations and maybe more specifically tailor that team toward them. I think that's why we thought that this podcast would be awesome for the population.
Yeah, about how to tailor team to working with people who've been racially or in any other way discriminated against.
Yeah.
Well, how do we do that? What should we be thinking about?
Yeah, well, before that, just a little self-disclosure between me and Audrey.
Sure.
It was very. You know me, David. I was like to joke, but then whenever I think about this topic and thought about talking about this topic, I become very sad and teary and anxious, and I cried over this topic like several times when I prepare for this, for another similar training for the Feeling Good Institute, and not only did I start examining what happened before, did I start understanding what I went through, how that shaped the way I think, the way I feel, and my avoidance type of behavior. And the saddest realization is that it's still happening today. Like discrimination and hatred that I experienced in the past is still happening today. And I have not, in fact, many of my Asian friends or relatives are still very scared to go out too late. I think Rhonda, right? One of my cousin's restaurant near your neighborhood was vandalized, and it was a pretty good neighborhood in Oakland, and that was the only restaurant that is Chinese restaurant. So we were freaked out. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That was the only Chinese restaurant in Berkeley?
On that street.
Yeah, there was a rock that was thrown through the front window, and it was really sad.
Mm-hmm.
So, Sunny, were you saying that preparing for this podcast was kind of triggering for you?
Yeah, because I it's kind of
bringing up bad memory,
and also kind of still angry that it's still happening. Yeah, I thought that things are better. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. In fact, sometimes I said, did it get worse? I don't know.
They seem to be getting worse in the last year or two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All around the world.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sadly. So, Audrey, was it triggering for you also to prepare for the podcast?
Yeah, I felt very similarly to Sunny with the sadness, the anxiety. I've often heard clients tell me, like they don't denounce racism, they don't talk about it because when they do, they are told that they are the problem. They are the ones who are racist. And I know I often got those messages as well. And I think for me personally too, like in my country of origin, there's lots of different ethnic and religious communities that coexist. And it is almost a taboo to talk about discrimination and racism. Like it is viewed like as a threat to local social unity amongst different groups. So it's very sensitive. And I realized preparing for the podcast that it still is sensitive for me, having grown up in that environment. And I also felt a lot of self-doubt too. Because on some occasions where I gathered the courage to talk to people from my country who were often from different ethnic groups about my experiences, people's reactions would range from being incredulous, or they would tell me blatantly that it wasn't true, that I was sort of making it up and it was my own weakness, like I shouldn't be affected by things like that, and they're not really happening anyway. So even before a few days ago, preparing for the podcast, I was researching evidence that very racism in my country towards my ethnic group. And sure enough, there is evidence for that. But yeah, there's still that sort of self-doubt that's very internalized for me. And also I felt I was so grateful to have Sunny to prepare the podcast with, and we had meetings and we talked a few times, but it did bring up some loneliness too, of like reminiscent of when I was growing up and not really understanding what was happening, knowing I was treated differently, but not being able to put words and have people to talk to when it comes to that. And sometimes by people who were very highly regarded by my peers and they spoke very highly of, but I had a very different experience interacting with those people because they would have certain attitudes towards me that, were different. So, yeah.
Let me see if I get what you're both saying. You, especially, you're saying it, Audrey, but you might have also said it, Sunny. But I think people are very defensive in our culture and don't like to be criticized. And so if you speak up about racism, then people feel criticized and then they get defensive and blame you and say you're exaggerating, something like that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think there's some of that for sure. Yeah.
And that makes it very hard for you to speak your truth because you get punished more for doing that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I think I saw. I can understand that. For sure. I just saw a very mild version of it. We did this podcast on the bad group. Just recently, Black African descendants. We had three delightful people, and I just said in passing that when I was a teenager, another fellow and I hitchhiked from Phoenix to New York to go to the National Student Council convention because we really wanted to attend. We didn't have any money. And it was fun. It was in the days when it was safe to hitchhike, and we met a lot of people along the way. But I mentioned that when we got to New York for this convention, there were kids from all over, including kids from the South. And I remember very vividly that the fellow I went with, Bob Smellick, and I were talking with some kids from the South who were so intent on the idea that there was something wrong with Black people, that they were inferior. Mm. And it was very, very entrenched, that this belief, and they couldn't kind of put their finger on what it was, but they were just totally rigid in this. And it was like, well, do Black people have a bad smell or a bad body odor, or are they less intelligent? What is it that you're claiming? Because we're trying to understand this. And they're always kind of very, very vague about it, but they were very, very stubborn and intent. And I was just really impressed with how rigid and inflexible this way of thinking was. So I just mentioned that, hoping to add some small value to a show where I'm not much of an expert in this area, being kind of a whitey myself, which you may have noticed. But at any rate, I thought it was an innocent comment. And then I got slammed from somebody, not terribly, but I went ahead and published their feedback on it, that I was the one who was prejudiced, and I was making all Southern people, painting them with a broad brushstroke, and they're not all like that, and something like that. And I suppose there was some truth to that. I'm sure all people living in the South are very different, and some are, I'm sure, intensely hateful toward people of color or anyone who's different, and some of them probably very liberal and very loving and very open and flexible. But it was that, somebody feeling the urge to slam me and kind of put me in my place. And of course, it wasn't very much of a blow because I was a nice whitey, so they didn't want to attack me too much. But I just want to throw that out there. And I didn't defend against that criticism. I wasn't really sure what would be the best thing to do. So I just let it be published as a feedback, one of many comments on that episode. But I thought about it a little bit and wondered about it. But I can imagine, people don't want to look at their own prejudice, their own racial bias, because it seems so shameful, and everyone wants to imagine themselves as so lily white and so pure, and get really kind of angry and violent toward anyone who claims they're violent. Anyway, I don't know. Is what I'm saying showing any partial understanding of what you're saying, Audrey, or am I just way out in left field? Or
no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I think, it's very hard for people to look at their own biases for sure. And I know as Sunny and I were talking about the podcast, we were also talking about how we also have some of those that we internalized towards other groups. And it just shows us that it's a reality, right? Like we all get those messages, we all internalize them, and it's a very sensitive topic to talk about. It's
pleasurable to look down on people.
Yeah. I think that's the dark side of humor, right? You often talk about, and that whole vague but rigid view are very strong. And that's why I was like kind of uncomfortable even being in this podcast. I hope people don't attack me for what I have to say. But we are hoping that this is an opportunity for all of you to know our story and stories about those marginalized clients, and help understand how to overcome those challenges using TEAM, because it's very, very effective.
So Sunny, tell us, like sometimes people don't have an option about who their therapist is if they have to use their health insurance or if they're going to a clinic. And let's say the therapist is a different race or even a white person, and they're working with somebody who is a person of color or a woman or a member of the LGBTQ community, or just somebody who's completely different from their patient. Could you tell me a little bit more? I'm really interested in learning how would that therapist best serve their client or their patient who's very different from them?
Well, the diversity committee within Feeling Good, which we are part of, have some training on that. But Audrey and I thought that we would actually pick out some of these past type of biases and discriminations that are faced by these folks, and how to use TEAM to help them. So the three that we're going to focus today are like some systemic racism, microaggressions, and internalized oppression. So maybe, Audrey, you can start with talking about systemic racism first, that many of these clients, like our clients, experience.
Yeah, because Audrey, what struck me about your introduction was that it sounds like when you were talking to people about the racism that you experienced, that it was denied and people said, oh, that's not happening or that's not true. And so your reality was kind of taken away from you and denied. So is that a part of dealing with someone when they discuss systemic racism with you?
Yes, I think absolutely. It's, I know this makes it hard for people to even bring it up because a lot of them have experiences of being invalidated when they talk about these things or blamed for it. So, I think that's a huge, huge part of it.
Yeah, a lot of them don't even want to bring it up. So I think part of what Audrey and I were talking about is bring it up during testing or assessment stage, right?
Yeah, and how much we love also that in TEAM, we really emphasize using the 5 secrets during that stage as we're assessing clients. And from the get-go, right? And really disarming and stroking, and just for the fact that they're bringing this up, they're trusting us enough to talk about these things, and that's really huge. So
and anger too, right? Like bringing it up, validating the anger, because a lot of people in my culture, the Asian culture, we were told not to be angry, especially to authority like parents or like to the system. So being angry is bad. So we don't talk about it. All this unfairness. So doing testing is important to kind of like ask them specifically, right? What like whether you have experienced any of these. When we talk about trauma, it doesn't mean getting beat up or that too, but getting abused, but also like being discriminated.
Yeah.
So the first thing I think, I like to keep things very simple because I'm not that bright. But one very simple thing is that if you're a shrink and you have someone who's a member potentially of a discriminated group, whether it's sexual or racial or immigrant or whatever it happens to be, that you would want to, in your initial evaluation of that person, ask them if you experienced traumas and discrimination, and then also to use your good feeling empathy skills, and ask specifically, tell me what that's like. So, Sunny, I can imagine that was terrifying to you to get beaten up. But also, I wouldn't be surprised if you were pretty pissed off and enraged and maybe even wanting to get revenge. And then at the same time thinking, I better not be angry because then I'll get hurt even more. And maybe feeling shame, intense anxiety, sadness, maybe I'm not good enough, inadequacy, loneliness, alone, unwanted, discouraged. Does any of this make sense? Does that ring a bell with how you felt?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very awesome 5 secret. In addition, if you are from a more privileged situation, for example, if you're a white male talking to people of color, it may be good to do some self-disclosure and acknowledge that you may have privilege that they don't have, that I can't imagine how it would felt in the past when you were abused. And I can imagine you might have some anger still, and maybe even when you look at me, something like that. Yeah, I think some self-disclosure would be good. Because I guess it depends on who you are, who is your clients, whether
I see. It hurts them to be angry with you and express their feelings in the here and now, not just a clinical historical thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I love that.
So are you feeling that way right now, Sunny?
Oh yeah, I am. For the audience who doesn't know David and I know each other for a long time.
Yeah, this is good. And then if I go to one more step to maybe relate that to some of your current symptoms, and not be focusing just on the here and now, because our histories are an important part of our current identity, our current experience of things.
When I prepared for this, a lot of shame, a lot of anger came out because I did not realize how systemic it was that me and people who look like me got beat up like systemically, not just like one rusty thing.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And Audrey, it seems like it's a big deal here in California. I really thought California was some wonderful liberal place, and it is, but still there seems to be like a whole lot of hatred right here in California toward Asian people.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh yeah, during the pandemic there were a lot of Asian older adults who were beaten up and pretty badly in San Francisco's Chinatown and Oakland's Chinatown too.
Yep.
And that's, by the way, the evil in human nature. So a lot of people, it kind of ticks me off. They're always saying, oh, you know, people aren't evil. We're basically good, but we get frustrated sometimes. Don't give me that BS. The evil is real and exists in people in varying degrees. And some people take great pleasure in hurting others and putting people down. It's sick, but it's very common. It's horrible. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know my book called Feeling Good Together. Do you know what I really wanted to call it? But the publishers wouldn't let me. I suppose I could have insisted it, but I wanted to call it the Pan-Dog Principle. You know what Pan-Dog stands for?
No.
People are no damn good.
Oh, wow.
That's what conflict is about. It's that, you know, I'm going to blame you. I'm going to hurt you. I'm right. You're wrong. I'm better than you. I'll shut up now because I don't have anything useful to say. You guys do. So you guys keep talking.
So you were talking, Audrey and Sunny, about how one way to focus on systemic racism, and I thought, David, you did a really beautiful 5 secrets to illustrate it. Yeah. Was using the 5 secrets within the testing and assessment, and also the empathy phase with your patient.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really good. But yeah, with systemic racism, like it's true, like it's something that is generalized, and it's hard because sometimes it's institutions that we need to go to for help. Like I know Indigenous clients in Canada, there's lots of research on that. Like they are discriminated against in the healthcare system. For example, clients tell me, you know, like I get overly questioned about my drug and alcohol use, even if it might not be relevant in that moment compared to other clients, or people don't believe them, that the healthcare professionals don't believe them or dismiss them when we talk about symptoms they're experiencing. So
they don't believe your what?
When they talk about symptoms, let's say they say, oh, like I have those headaches like all the time, like those get dismissed, or they don't get, people
you
don't
mean when you have
them.
Symptoms, they get dismissed?
Yeah, like when you talk to a doctor, right? Like at the hospital, and you tell them this is what I'm going through. Sometimes it's not taken seriously.
And then they're asking you a lot about drug and alcohol abuse.
Yeah, there's lots of stereotypes, unfortunately, in Canada around that.
And did you get over that now?
Yeah, so the Indigenous people, right?
I'm just being ridiculous. Shut up, David. But sometimes we have to laugh about this awful stuff. But yes, you experience bias even from healthcare professionals, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and I'm saying more specifically Indigenous clients in Canada, which I am not Indigenous, but yeah, that would be even worse for them when they go to a healthcare professional. So yeah, it's
because you have some of those clients, right, who are Indigenous.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Exactly. So they're experiencing that. Yeah. So and they were basically telling you about the systemic racism they are facing. Yeah. Yep. And how did you find out? Yeah. Did you ask them, or did they tell you? Yeah.
I asked them, and yeah, oftentimes I love what you were saying earlier, Sunny, about re-normalizing those things and asking. And you were saying that to David, because a lot of them are surprised sometimes. They're like, I've been in therapy before and nobody has ever asked me about those things. Like there will be a focus on, like you're depressed or you're anxious, but sometimes there's not a lot of evaluation around those experiences as well, and how they contribute to how people are feeling. So that's very important. And something else that came up for me as you were talking, Sunny, is that sometimes we can see that somebody is from a certain group, and we want to ask those questions. But I have had experiences of, for example, I had a client who was a Canadian woman of European descent, who was cisgender, but she came from a particular region in Canada where women are stereotyped to be a certain way. And I had no idea. And I didn't ask her about those things. It was back when I wasn't asking those questions. And it was very relevant to what she was facing. But because she wasn't a visible minority, like from a visible group, I didn't ask those things. So I wanted to say, sometimes we can't tell when somebody is in front of us what their identities are. Right? Like we think we can, but we really can't. So we do need to ask those questions. And I love that TEAM gives a safe and empathetic space for these to be explored with clients.
And what you're saying is this should be part of our training and history taking when we have new clients. And it wasn't a part of mine. And even in my therapist toolkit, I had some really cool things about history taking to help myself and others. But it was asking about sexual things that therapists find it embarrassing to ask about that are really desirable. Like, have you ever been raped? Have you ever raped anyone? Have you ever had sexual fantasies that are upsetting to you, that you're ashamed of? And things like that open a person up and show that you're wanting to hear what they have to say. And I actually had them written out, so I'd have to read them because it was kind of scary to do it. But now I'm seeing there's a whole other part of the history that needs to be added to that, and get the questions for therapists to ask new patients to get at some of these issues. That's what I've heard from you so far. Now, you've covered systemic racism a little bit. There were three things. That microaggression was number 2, and what was number 3? It went so fast I didn't write it down.
Internal oppression. Yeah.
Internal oppression. And can you comment on this microaggression and internal oppression part of it? Because I'm learning a lot from you. And by the way, I loved the Bad Group podcast that we did, Rhonda, but I always thought that something was missing from it. Mm-hmm. That it was very kind of polite. I'm glad that they're helping Black young people become team therapists, but I didn't know what questions to ask them on the podcast. Like, what have you experienced? What should we be asking? I just didn't have the vocabulary for knowing how to get it started.
Well, and Audrey and Sunny are kind of giving us the platform to ask questions.
That's right.
Yeah, so that's cool. And Audrey, since you brought it up, with your last patient that you talked about, do you have suggestions for questions we could all include in our history taking or during the testing or assessment phase that we all could ask everyone like you've just described?
We have some really good ones in the training that the committee put together. I know there's a tool that we have, and maybe we can link it, Sunny. It looks like a wheel, and it has like different sections in there that ask about ethnic identity, sexual orientation, gender, all those different things, and people can fill it out, and it asks, okay, like what are the most important identities in there for you? What are the things that you feel influence your life the most? What do you think about the most? And I think that's a really neat way to get to know our clients better. And we can also do our own as therapists. And I think it's very enlightening when we do that work, because then we understand the privileges that we have, and we can use those for self-disclosure as well as we connect more deeply with clients.
If you Google DSM cultural formulation interview, the APA actually offer a set of interview and questions to ask about to these folks who are like marginalized. What kind of questions you may want to ask them?
You said T isn't. Could you say
DSM? The DSM.
Oh, the DSM. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's part of the DSM-5. They have they have a set of questions to ask and how you ask them. But having said that, because it was these type of questions were rarely asked. I remember when I was just casually asking some of my patients whether they have experienced racism or sexism and stuff, they actually filled the whole hour talking about it because no one ever asked them. So I don't even think it needs to be that precise when you ask them. But yeah, the DSM cultural formulation interview has a set of questions you can ask them.
But also, did you just say if you simply ask your patient, have you experienced any racism, sexism, or homophobia?
Yeah.
That sparks a big conversation.
Yeah, like the way I ask is one of my intake question usually is, do you experience any trauma? Mm-hmm. And for example, when I work with Asian clients, and oh no, I don't have trauma. I said, well, let me clarify. Trauma doesn't mean that you got abused physically or sexually, but like when you first moved to the U.S., have you experienced being made fun of, being bullied, being followed when you are just doing your own thing? And then just that simple question, actually, they end up talking a lot. Yeah. And some of them actually end up crying. Like, oh yeah, I can't believe, and even link back to some of the more current situation with work promotion, and they're not being get promoted as much and things like that. Yeah. So
this is a stupid question, but do you think that trauma is on the increase in the world right now?
I don't know.
I think so.
I think
you see Ukraine and everything is like hatred is just. Did you ever see that movie Needful Things?
No.
Boy, that's a great. It was one of those Stephen King science fiction-y things, but it's just about the devil moves into this town, but he's disguised as an antique shop owner, and he gets everyone doing mean things to each other, and finally, in the end, the whole town just goes up in a huge fire and war and battle, and everyone kills everybody. And that kind of seems like that's what's happening. And it's probably a stupid thing to say in this podcast, but it seems related to what you're saying, because what you're really talking about is just raw hatred of people and wanting to hurt people.
Yeah, and like what you're saying, based on very vague but rigid ideas. Yeah. Yep.
So let's talk about microaggression.
So microaggression is like, according to this website, UUA website, just is like everyday verbal, nonverbal snubs, whether intentional or unintentional, which communicate hostile or derogatory message to target person based upon their marginalized group membership. Okay, let me translate what that means to me. I got comment a lot, Sunny, you don't act gay at all. Or when they ask, where are you actually from? I hated those two questions because it almost feels like I'm not as American or as human as my white counterparts. And then more specific, like also more behavioral-wise, whenever when I was in tech, I was a director of engineering, and I brought one of my engineers to see different customers, and the engineer is white, but they always assume that he is the manager and I'm the employees, like the way they ask stuff, and I hated that too. And then actually vice versa, when I was starting to do my social work internship, my counterpart, who is a white woman, who's an intern for doctor, they always assume I'm the doctor. She is a social worker. So all these things kind of just make us feel like we are not good enough. Somehow we had to be someone that we are not to assimilate. But ultimately, the message to me, at least, is that I'm not good enough as I am. And I need to kind of be nice or be perfectionist so that we can be accepted. At least that's how the message I got from microaggression. Yeah. How about you, Audrey? Do you have similar experience? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And different ones, but one that really stuck with me and I think influenced me was that, as I said, I compensated a lot for being told I was not good enough by doing very well academically. And I was in the most prestigious public institutions in my country. And I often had people tell me, well, you're smart because you are somewhat mixed. Like, you're not just of African descent, you have other origins, and that's why you're smart. Or you're different from others in your ethnic group because you work so hard, right? Like, that's not typical of other people in your group. And not realizing these are not compliments to me. They actually are pretty hurtful.
Yeah, and the way that, and many of our clients talk about these as we uncover them. Yeah. So the way we use TEAM, first of all, TEAM actually have the whole structure to work with the clients already. I'm just being more specific. As we mentioned during empathy stage, mention anger and acknowledge anger. Some Asian groups, for example, don't really like to use the word anger just because it's like a term that was drilled in us that we are not supposed to think like we are like that because otherwise we are aggressive, non-productive, or abusive. So I sometimes would try to use like less intense word like irritated, or I just kind of equate it with the angry thought, like, oh yeah, that you must think that is unfair. So that's how I got around acknowledging anger sometimes. And then again, acknowledge, and then positively reframe the anger and why it's important to have anger in this situation, because it really puts around, for example, one positive reframe is it kind of put a protective wall around me so that I don't get hurt or violated. Definitely let me know that this comment is unjust and that there's nothing wrong with me. And also really help us recognize that, we do live in a world that are not equal, and we don't want to accept it, but we need to understand that that's the reality.
You help us understand that we're living in a world that can be hateful. Is that what you said?
Yes, that can be hateful. Yeah, that can be hateful and evil. And that is not you. I for many years I tried to improve. Sorry, yes, kind of emotion. For many years I tried to improve.
Well, get emotional.
Try to improve my accent, because somehow people are making fun of my accent as foreign, even though like a lot of my French or British friends have accent too, but somehow they're better. So I took like years of training on accent, and somehow my brain doesn't work. I don't change, and people keep asking me, where are you actually from? And I hated it. But I guess through the healing process of TEAM and other things, I'm okay with who I am and proud of my accent. Yeah.
Well, that's powerful. Thank you, Sunny.
Yeah, Sunny, that's like a combination of coping with microaggressions and also internalized racism, because it sounds like there's a bit of internalized racism, like I'm not good enough because of my accent.
Yeah, it's a
is
lot
that
of
the third thing? Internal oppression, internal racism. What is the term? Internal oppression or internal racism?
Internalized oppression.
Internalized oppression. Yeah.
And Audrey, you mentioned that you've experienced that as well.
Yeah. Internalized oppression. Yeah.
And how would a team therapist support their client through that?
We actually really love the positive reframing for that, because it's really a way to deeply connect on an empathetic level with a client, like validate the experience. And of course, like it's a very powerful agenda setting tool as well. But we also discussed in the community. So just to sort of define what it is a little bit. So it's when people internalize false messages that they are inferior to other people. And they will think those negative things about themselves, but also people who look like them. And often there's shame attached to that. And so in our meetings with a diversity committee and the course that was created, like we talked about how it can be very sensitive for people to reframe shame and other emotions as well that are similar. And we talk about how we have found it helpful to approach asking some clients about those emotions by taking into account how sensitive it is. So we would say something like, what are the advantages or functions of that emotion of shame? Like, how is it adaptive for you, or serves a function for human survival in your case? And then ask about positive core values by saying, what do these functions and advantages show about you in terms of positive core values? So we frame it a little bit different.
What are some answers to that question? Like maybe we could do that right now.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you specifically, when I was very shameful of being gay and act gay or walk gay or dress like gay. Now I dress whatever, whatever I want. But it was a protective mechanism because when I was young in Catholic, I've seen parents kicking out their gay sons and daughter, which I think is totally evil. Again, is unloving. When they kicked them out of the house, and some of them became homeless. I actually worked with some homeless kids before who get kicked out too. So it's definitely protective to kind of tell them, hey, it's not quite fair that it's happening, but you do need to be aware of the society seeing that as unacceptable and it's dangerous. So you have to be careful. Yeah, but you still need to be proud, but be careful. Yeah, I don't know. Audrey, any other ideas? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the protection one is a very important one. And also it shows that they're, when they experience shame around that identity, it shows that they are realistic, that like the discrimination exists, like they're not denying it, like they are aware of it, and also that they care about having parents who are loving and take care of them. And it just is so painful when that doesn't happen.
It sounds to me like we're talking about what I used to call the abuse contract. It's the contract between an abuser and a victim. And I would use it in the context of someone who was sexually abused, say, as a child. And there's three parts to the contract. One is I get to hurt you for my pleasure. In some way, I can physically or sexually or psychologically, abuse you, be mean to you. The second part of the contract you have to agree to is we have to keep this a secret. If you try to bring it to conscious awareness, you'll really be hurt. You can't even leak to me the idea that I'm doing something wrong. Say I'm the predator. And then the third part of the contract, it's all going to be your fault. All the badness is with you. I'm like the super God person. That's called the abuse contract, and that sounds exactly like what you're talking about with the racial stuff. First of all, I'm going to look down on you for my pleasure. I'm superior to you, and you're not as good as I am. You're dirt, and I'm the white, clean, special one. And secondly, if you try to tell me that this is going on, I'm really going to get mad and hurt you. And then third, and I think this is what you're calling the internalized oppression, it's your fault. You're inferior. You're not good enough. That's why this is happening.
Yep.
So is that a correct reflection of what you folks are saying?
Yes, and these type of message shape the way I think about myself, that it's my fault, I'm not good enough, and because it's my fault, nothing else is wrong, you just work twice as hard.
Yeah.
And then things will be okay. Look at this person, they got into Harvard, you just work 3 times as hard like that person, and then you'll be the model. Yeah, and then don't be like the other people who just kind of gave up because of yeah. So it's our fault. It's up to us. Yeah. So yeah.
And
so this has been specific and emotional and eye-opening to say the least. A really tremendous podcast. How are we doing at understanding what you are trying to say, both of you? And is there anything else that you want to get across?
I really love the comparison you made, David. And I just wanted to chime in to say that it's not just when it comes to race, right? It's also about, as Sunny was saying, LGBTQ people or disabled people sometimes. Like we sometimes look down on them as abled people and think they're superior, and we're not allowed to say anything about that. So it can be for so many different groups.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a little child who has a physical disability and is in a wheelchair might and probably will be very unpopular and find it hard to find friends. And and it's really a sad thing. And this is all about human nature. And boy, given how hostile everything's getting, I don't know if the human race is going to survive, to be honest with you, with all the, talking nuclear weapons now and the hatred. It just really, that's why I like that movie, Needful Things, because, no one else gets that excited about that movie, but I thought it was a masterpiece of the human race and how corruptible people are and how easily people get into hatred and pulling dirty tricks on other people and getting into these battles of that become increasingly violent and hateful. I probably sound like a stupid old man ranting away, but
well, you don't. You're making really important points about the sort of the degradation of and the toxic culture that we're living in.
Yeah.
But it also sounds like, Sunny and Audrey, what you're saying is that the team model can really be healing if people use, 5 secrets and the testing and, an improved history taking and positively reframing and, the shame that people feel when they're experiencing internalized racism. And that you're giving me a little hope that that team therapy can be healing when you're working with people who've experienced these horrible conditions.
But particularly in the area I think you're emphasizing of empathy and getting more multidimensional in our 5 secret skills and asking better questions. And then also in the very importance and new dimensions in positive reframing and paradoxical agenda setting and so forth. But I remember on a lot of hikes, Sunny, that you told me that you were anxious and thought you weren't good enough. And we worked on that in the here and now using a wide variety of techniques. Mm-hmm. But I should have been asking you, even back in those days, more questions about what you've been through. I didn't have those questions in mind to be asking. And I'm sure you must have noticed that at the time, that David isn't asking the right questions. Although I cherish the work we did together and the friendship we've had. It's always been, A+ in my book. But I'm looking back and seeing some errors that I made as your colleague, but acting in the role of a clinician.
Well, I made some error myself when I did not dive into that specific questions to my own clients too. I think this is something that a collective group of people, including Audrey and me and part of the diversity committee, realize that TEAM-CBT works really well. And there's evidence because we do our BMS, we do our evaluation therapy sessions.
Oh, yeah.
Work really well. At the same time, there's some common trauma, common bias that some of these a subset group of people experience that it would be much more efficient if we go straight there instead of like going through organically. So it would be, that's why I think this podcast would be useful if anything, just be more aware that these type of experience does affect how we feel, how we act, what we believe, and how we behave.
Right. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. One last question for you, and you may not know the answer to it, but there was something from the Feeling Good Institute about somebody's developing a scale. Maybe, I think Amber Warner developed some kind of a scale for measuring impact of racial bias or something like that we can use clinically. Do either of you know anything about that to start measuring this phenomenon in our clinical work?
I didn't read the brief, but I saw something come across. So yeah, there's something to that effect. There's a few now that exist that can be used clinically, and those are available now.
Well, I don't know about, I haven't heard about that. Maybe we could find out about it and do a link.
Yeah,
in our
I got
show notes.
an email from the Feeling Good Institute from Orr Katz. He had 4 new things, and he mentioned that new scale for measuring racial bias or something, new testing,
well,
things that.
We have to wrap up. Let me just ask you as a wrap-up question, is there any place that you would suggest we go to learn more about the topics that you've discussed today?
So I did a podcast with the Feeling Good Institute called Introduction to Diversity. Just Google Sunny Diversity is on YouTube. So that has a good basics.
That's not really a podcast. That's a whole training on YouTube.
It's like a 1 hour.
Yeah, a 1 hour training on YouTube.
1 hour training on YouTube. And and at the end of that presentation, there's a lot of links to all the relevant information, including the links to the DSM multicultural component questions you can ask, interview. Yeah.
Well, send me the link to that, Sunny, and I'll include it in the show notes for people so they can check it out.
Sounds good.
Audrey, is there anything you want to refer our listeners to learn more about the topics you've discussed?
I think what Sunny provided is really good. And as we mentioned a little bit before, like there is this training also from the Diversity Committee that was offered already for this year. And we had a lot of people come through and lots of positive feedback. So,
and we're planning to have more of that yearly. Yeah.
Yes.
Now, let me ask you guys a final question before we sign off. This would be a new one for a podcast, but give us a grade, all of us. How did we do in today's podcast in terms of what you hope to accomplish in the podcast and what we actually accomplished? Start with you, Audrey. Would you give us an A, a B, a C, a D, an F? What did you like, and what worked and what didn't? Where did we fall short, and what was good about it?
I think it was an A, definitely. I think Sunny and I had that space, and we felt comfortable and safe to talk about what we've been through and also present on the work we've been doing. One thing I wanted to add to what you were saying before, David, about entrenched beliefs, when it comes to what it means to be white and Black. Just to know that I think from what I've sort of seen, like there's historical things in there too, right? Like that's how colonization and slavery and all these things have been condoned in the past, is by dividing people in those ways. So I just wanted to add that as well. So
yeah, that's right. And then the U.S., the right-wing people, the Republicans, they get pissed off at that. They don't want us to talk about slavery in the United States, and it's like what you were talking about. Like they get very, very angry and oppressive, and we got to ban this stuff in our schools, and this is un-American to talk about it.
Thank you, Audrey, for giving us.
Thank you, Audrey.
Sunny, what grade would you give us? And then we sadly have to close this really powerful podcast.
In terms of emotion, because I was able to connect to all of you and not being judged. This is from someone who is afraid to speak up because of being judged. So, and then logically, I thought you all did very good, allowing us to talk about our background, talking about different type of biases and how to use team to work with it. So I thought you all did very, very well. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I enjoyed it a lot. I learned so much from both of you today. It was just, and you made it real easy to learn too.
This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes under the podcast page. You will also find archives of previous episodes and many resources for therapists and non-therapists. We welcome your comments and questions. If you want to support the show, please share the podcast with people who might benefit from it. You could also go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski, the director of the Feeling Great Therapy Center. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.